G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we are here to preview round 8 with our tips and everything in between. So we'll cover a couple of the massive games coming up in round 8, and then we'll get to our full tips as we usually do. So the first game I want to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at is the Bombers up against North Melbourne on Thursday night. A really intriguing contest in my opinion, both teams down the bottom end of the ladder towards this point in the season. However, Essendon have been a lot better in the past month or so, while North Melbourne have been a bit of a roller coaster, to say the least. A couple of weeks ago against Carlton were absolutely smashed, but last week against Port Adelaide, they were actually quite good. I think there's a couple of question marks going into this game, and I think it heavily depends on which of the teams show up. If both of the teams show up, then we're in for one hell of a contest. However, if it goes one way, then I think this could be a massacre. Now, North Melbourne were better last week against Port Adelaide, like I mentioned, but nearly half of their goals were scored from umpire interference or umpire involvement, while Essendon looked disinterested in the first quarter against Collingwood on Anzac Day. But after that point, they actually gave a real effort, and especially with their pressure around the ball, it was absolutely immense in my opinion. Now, the reason why I'm going to be picking Essendon in this game is because I think if both teams bring their best, I think Essendon would come out on top. And in the last month or so, I've seen a lot more consistency from the Bombers rather than North Melbourne. So that's really where I'm looking at here. And I do think that North Melbourne's defence is quite shaky. And surprisingly, I don't think I would have been saying this at the start of the year, but I actually trust the Essendon forward line a little bit more than North Melbourne's at the moment. And the North Melbourne midfield need to seriously lift, because I think they've got one of the best midfields in the competition, but they're getting beaten by lesser sides. And I think if Essendon win in the midfield, I think they'll win this game. However, my brother has gone and picked North Melbourne for this contest, and he's basically gone in blind faith. He says that he doesn't really have much hope in either of these teams winning. He says it's a real 50-50 game, but he's basically just looking at the form from last week that North Melbourne put up a little bit more of a fight than the Bombers. Now, on to the next game I want to take a look at is Saturday afternoon, Adelaide up against Carlton. This is a massive game for both teams. Carlton coming off some great form, 3 wins in a row. Adelaide probably coming off their worst performance of the year. Now, on this game itself, it is at Adelaide, and Carlton have a very poor record at Adelaide Oval against SA teams. They've won their last couple of games at Adelaide Oval through gather round against Fremantle and West Coast. However, other than that, they find it very difficult to win Adelaide Oval. I think they've only won one game against an SA team since Adelaide Oval came to the AFL. So that's an interesting watch for Carlton. Riley Thilthorpe does have a hurt hand. From my understanding, he is going to play through it. However, will it hamper him, especially if he has to play through the ruck and having to take strong contested marks? I don't know how much that's going to hamper him, so we just have to wait and see on that front. And on Carlton, they did have the number 3 and number 4 ranked defenders in the league, but with the recent news that Silvani will be out through injury, that does change things a little bit for Carlton. The matchups are going to be really important at either ends of the ground, and I think this game will be decided predominantly at stoppage. If Carlton can win the midfield battle, then I think they have a real chance of winning this game. However, if the Crows midfielders can just even it up at the very least, or if they win it, I think the Crows will run this game through the ground later parts of the game. I think the Crows can even it up in the midfield. The Cats were very poor last week, hence why I think Carlton got away with a lot of stuff in that first half. They were very mature to hold on to the lead. However, at Adelaide Oval, a cauldron of the Adelaide Oval, they struggle in Adelaide against South Australian teams. I really can't see Carlton getting it done. And with the recent injury to Jack Silvani, I don't think they can contain the Adelaide Crows forward. So I'm going with Adelaide, and my brother's going with the Crows as well. Next up, probably the game of the round coming into it, is Collingwood up against Geelong at the MCG Saturday night. The Pies' defence has been brilliant so far this season, probably the best in the competition, and the Cats have been a little bit up and down. They had a really good performance against Fremantle in round 1, then got beaten by St Kilda. We saw it the last couple of weeks, and they beat the Crows in gather round, and then a couple of weeks later they lose to Carlton at the MCG. You really expect them to win that game. So historically, slow starters, Geelong, in start to the season. However, I don't know, it's just a bit of a wait and see on the Cats if they can get their season up and going. Geelong were extremely poor in the first half last week, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, and they were smashed through the first 3 quarters in the midfield. Now, one thing the Cats need to do if they're going to cause a upset in this game is they have to bring immense pressure. The one thing that they could hang their hat on from last week's Essendon's performance is the fact that in the second and third quarter, when Essendon made their charge, their pressure on the Collingwood possession was immense, and it showed that the Collingwood Football Club are human. They can make turnovers, they made mistakes, and Essendon got back into the game. And with Geelong with a lot more quality than the Bombers, if they can bring that pressure for 3 or 4 quarters, I think they can win this game. The problem is can Geelong really do that? They've not really been known as a massive pressure side. And players like Stengel, for example, hasn't really had a good start to the year. Close has been pretty good. Myers was out last week, so hopefully they can bring him back in this week as well. And it does seem that Tom Stewart may be a bit of an iffy one, depending on if he's going to be in or out. We'll have to wait and see on that. But on Collingwood's point of view, it's hard to tip against them right now. They are the best team in the competition as of round 8. They're top of the ladder. Darcy Moore should be back this week, who's been in great form so far in 2025. And really, that's where I'm going to sit. Collingwood look unbeatable at the moment. Even when they were heavily challenged last week against the Bombers, they stood up. They looked brilliant. Nick Dacos is in Brownlow form. Still Sidebottom is arguably in Brownlow form as well. Pendlebury's playing well. Their forwards look good. Their defence is extremely solid. They've got a great ruckman. And, I mean, I don't think you can pick against Collingwood at this stage. I think at the MCG, this is Collingwood written to be still on top of the ladder at the end of the round. And my brother's gone the same. But to the final game I want to quickly highlight, and probably the most anticipated Q clash in the history of the AFL. Brisbane up against the Gold Coast Suns. The last game of round 8. What a game this will be. Both of them are in the top 4. Both teams have only had one game lost so far. So the Gold Coast, I think, would be a little bit concerned by their first half performance against Sydney last week, while Brisbane probably would have been a little bit disappointed by the way they finished the game. But overall, I think it was the most complete performance we've seen from the Lions so far this year. I'm going to go straight into the tip here because my brother's tipped differently. I'm going to be going Brisbane. I'm going to be picking Brisbane for a couple of reasons. The main one being the fact that the Gold Coast have been a little bit off the last few weeks. They were very poor against Richmond. They were too busy thinking about the body and thinking about fighting more than playing the game. And against Sydney in that first half, they weren't really good at all. I don't think they were really into that game until, the last 5 minutes of that second term when they got a couple of goals and then they got on their run of 12 goals in a row. I don't think they can rely on that. And the one thing I will say is I think Sydney, 95% of the Gold Coast winning that game was how poor Sydney played in the second half. And I know that takes a little bit away from the Gold Coast win, but I think the majority of the teams in the competition would have walked over Sydney in that second half because they just looked all out of it. They looked disinterested, and I know I'm just ragging on Sydney here, but I'm a Sydney Swan supporter and I was incredibly disappointed. I'm sorry. So I want to see a little bit more from the Gold Coast, and if they can win this game, then I'll be giving them a lot more praise, and I'll take back the words that I said about anyone could have beaten them. And another reason why I'm picking the Lions is because last week, I think I saw something a little bit different from them. The first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, when they were sitting on top of the ladder undefeated, they were using basically bursts of greatness to win games. But last week against St Kilda, it was the most complete performance, like I mentioned, and I think that that's the best I've seen Brisbane so far this year. So they use that loss against Collingwood as like a wake-up call, and I think they're ready to go now. I think that really propelled them into their season, and I think that the Lions are going to go with it. And the fact that it is at the Gabba as well, I think that just does enough for the Lions to win this one. However, my brother has picked the Gold Coast Suns. So he has said that the Gold Coast have a great opportunity to win one of only a few Q clashes here. With their midfield and forward line in full force, they can really test the Brisbane Lions on the counter. Now, he's also mentioned the fact that they need to win this game to show that they're actually a real finals contender, and I tend to agree. I don't think you can count the Gold Coast as a real finals contender just yet. So this is their first real big test, and if they can win that, then I can see them being right up there at the end of the season. So let's get into our tips. So for round 8, my tips are Essendon to beat North Melbourne, Fremantle to beat St Kilda, the Dogs to beat Port Adelaide, Adelaide to beat Carlton, Melbourne to beat the West Coast Eagles, Collingwood to beat Geelong, the Giants to beat Sydney, Hawthorn to beat the Tigers, and Brisbane to beat the Gold Coast Suns. And my brother's tips for round 8 are North Melbourne to beat Essendon, Fremantle to beat St Kilda, the Dogs to beat Port Adelaide, Adelaide to beat Carlton, Melbourne to beat West Coast, Collingwood to beat Geelong, GWS to beat Sydney, Hawthorn to beat the Tigers, and the Gold Coast to beat the Lions. So let's get to me and my brother's certainty picks for this week. My brother has put the certainty on the Crows to beat Carlton. Of course, the Crows losing to Fremantle last week. And my certainty tip is the Giants to beat Sydney. Of course, the Giants losing to the Western Bulldogs last week. Now, I know I've been ragging on Sydney a lot in this video already and they haven't really been mentioned, but I was really disappointed by their performance last week. I would like to think that they would respond, but I think it's a little bit of personnel, but I think a lot of it is really being confused about what Dean Cox wants them to do, and maybe that would just take time. I think, honestly, in the future of Sydney is great, But I think Dean Cox has got to find his identity with Sydney. And I say that because I think the best coaches and the best teams have an identity. And I don't think the Swans have that at the moment since John Longmire's left. So I think that is something that the Swans have to look at. But that's enough of the Swans for this preview to round 8. I'm sure you guys are sick of it. So finally, let's get to the channel's tipping ladder. So of course we have one for the channel, a tipping competition. If you didn't join it, you're too late. You can't win. I'm sorry. But looking at it, we had about 30 of you guys join up. And right now, the boy from SNB currently leads, did use his joker this week. So he had 6 tips up to 12, of course, being doubled. He is up the top by 2 tips on Leviticus, who is on 46. The boy from SNB is at 48. So good on him. But Leviticus, I have to mention him. Really good job. He's been really good when he gets a lot of tips. He got 8 out of 9 last week, picked the margin for the Melbourne v Richmond game, and I'm unsure if he's used his joker. If he has, he's doing okay. If he hasn't, I think the guy's got it locked up as a win already. Now, Ethan Sports was on top for the last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, didn't have a great week this week. Only got the 5 and has dropped down to 5th spot. So not the greatest, but I'm sure he'll be fine. He'll be happy that he beat the Swans because he's a Gold Coast supporter. So good on him. Hopefully he's not commenting on this video saying how good how much the Gold Coast win was, so much better than Sydney. Sydney suck. Hopefully he's not here to say that to me because I'll cry. But anyway, I'm sitting in 10th spot. I did jump up into the top 10 this week with a 7-tip performance. I'm doing pretty good with my tips so far. 42 for the year. Haven't used my joker just yet. So I'm still eyeing off a top place finish. Now I wanted to quickly remind you guys, because I haven't said it the last couple of weeks, but the winner, of course, of the tipping comp will be winning a $100 gift voucher to the AFL store. So just remember that, and we'll mention that at the end of the year when the tipping comp inevitably ends. But that's pretty much all we've got for this episode of the preview, guys, of course, for round 8. Make sure to let me know down below if you think your team is going to win this week. Let me know your tips as well down below in the comment section. But make sure to like and subscribe, of course. And that is all from me. So I'll catch you all next time.